All right, so my name's Ratnavyuha, and this is my friend Arthavadin. So Arthavadin, where are you at right now?
I'm in Chorlton, which is a suburb of Manchester in the UK.
Great. Well, welcome. You've just taken over the presidency of Sudarshanaloka recently, didn't you?
I did. That was November last year.
Yeah,
So yeah, I came over for a month, which was
yeah,
great.
yeah. Really pleased to have you part of our team visiting, and you're planning on coming back every November to
That,
the Fair
that's the
Island.
plan. That is the plan. But whether it happens this year or not remains to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what's it like over there in Manchester?
Well, right now the sun's shining, and it has done for the last couple of days, which is unusual. Manchester's famous for rain,
Mm.
but it's quiet. It's quiet. It's sort of. I've said to a few people, it's sort of. It reminds me a little bit of New Zealand. Sort of, everything's gone quiet. Sort of the roads are empty. It feels much more spacious. Um, yeah, I think our situation is very similar to people in New Zealand. We're locked down. We're not allowed to go out and socialize, but we can go out for one period of exercise a day, and we can go shopping. That's it.
Mm.
That's all we can do. But yeah, it's very quiet.
Yeah, it's very still here too. And it's hard to really kind of capture the stillness because it's the streets are dead, but there's also it's like there's no planes in the sky and everything's just slower in some way. It's almost like an existential slowness.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. It's same here. I live near the airport. There's a quite a big airport in South Manchester,
Mm.
and there's always planes going overhead. I, yeah, there's nothing. The sky's clear. It's amazing.
Right. And we
Yeah,
we were talking earlier, and you were mentioning a period of time when it snowed and snowed and snowed and snowed in 1976 when you were a kid, and
yeah, that's right.
how enjoyable that was.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure whether it was 76 or 77, but there was one winter, and yeah, as you say, it just kept snowing. And unlike some other places in the world, Britain just isn't prepared for that much snow. And so everybody stopped going to work. All the schools closed. Nobody was going out except to play in the snow, making snowmen and whatever. I was 11, and it was fantastic. It was a moment in my childhood that I remember as being very happy, because everything went really quiet and still. It was as if the world had gone still. It was amazing, and
Mm,
and there is something of that now. Yeah, I
mm.
have. It's reminded me of that, and in some ways, as I was saying to you a little earlier, I feel a little awkward by the fact that in some respects I'm really enjoying this time right now.
Yeah, I think people here are finding that when we're having these kind of like Dharma cafes in the afternoon around 2, and people are checking in, and everybody's really connecting in with each other about how they're finding it, and
Mm.
people are really enjoying themselves. They're enjoying the stillness, they're enjoying the simplicity, they're enjoying being home, and some people are turning it into solitary retreats, um,
Yeah,
and at the same time we're very aware of a lot of suffering and death and pain in other parts of the world, and it's how do you reconcile that? It's you're in one from one perspective, you're enjoying yourself and you can't deny that, but it's almost like you want to you feel guilty feeling enjoying yourself, don't you?
yeah. Maybe maybe I would say I'm feeling more content than enjoying myself. Sort of,
Yeah,
uh, I'm not having a party.
yeah,
Nobody is, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
But you're right. I mean, yeah, in the UK, I know it's different in New Zealand now, but in the UK, yeah, thousands of people have died in the last couple of weeks, and I guess thousands more are going to die. So there is an awareness of that. It's always on the news, latest figures, deaths.
Mm.
Uh, uh, yeah, and yes, I certainly feel that sort of. yeah, an awareness of all this death going on. And my parents are elderly and they're vulnerable, so I'm aware of that in the background as well. And at the same time, yes, there is a sense of contentment and stillness. Or maybe it's stillness, simplicity, and contentment that is going on. And I have given it some thought, this, and sort of how do I reconcile this with myself? And my sense is, well, this is our existential situation anyway. This is what the Buddha told us. Uh, Samsara is like. He told us that life is fragile. We shouldn't take it for granted. And at the same time, his training was to learn to be at ease with that. That's the path to enlightenment, really. It's coming to terms with the transience of everything that's going on around us. And I think that's always there, but I guess right now we're more acutely aware of it. It's in our face, isn't it? And I certainly don't feel like I'm anywhere near enlightenment. But as a Buddhist, for years I've been reflecting on death, and I've been training myself to be with myself, and try to be more at peace with myself in a world that's been busy and chaotic and mad. And right now, actually, the world has gone quieter. So I think it's how do I reconcile it? Well, I'm just more acutely faced with what I've known anyway for a long time, or been taught for a long time. And I can appreciate, I feel like I can appreciate more with the greater awareness of death around me. I think there's something in that, really. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I think that you're right that we reflect on the possibility for old age, illness, and death, all the time, and we are going to die. And I reflect on my own death, and I try and remember when I talk to people that are older than me, that we don't know who's going to die first. I could die first, and even though I know that my death's coming, and even though I know that I could get ill, I want to live, I want to live my life contentedly and happily. And I want to appreciate beauty, and I want to rejoice in people, and I want to have, relationships with people that are meaningful. And so, I sometimes actually, to be honest, my mom's living in Florida, and I've been talking to her every day, but she's 80, and Florida could be a hot spot. And, if I think about all the people that are dying and losing the people I love, it just makes me cry.
Yeah.
And so I don't really want to think about that in the sense of keep taking my mind back there. But at the same time, I do think about that, that they will die. And that's why I want to call my mom every day, because I want to make sure she knows I love her,
I think maybe that's why. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's the situation we're in right now is a much more acute situation than it is normally. And I think we're encouraged by the situation to think about what's most important. You're saying that's what you're doing with your mom. You're phoning her every day. And what I've noticed, and I think it's happening everywhere, is as everything's getting stripped away, people are focusing on what's most important. And what are we all doing? We're all Zooming each other. We're all connecting with each other.
Yeah.
You strip everything away. That's what it boils down to. That's what's most important. It's our connection. It's the love we feel for one another, and wanting to feed those connections. And there's something, whilst I get overwhelmed by Zooming and all this deluge of communication, there's something beautiful in it as well. The fact that we're all realizing how important our connections are, and we want that connection. And it's so much nearer the surface than it is usually. That's what ultimately our life's about.
Yeah, it was funny because at this period of time too, my sister was supposed to get married, and I was supposed to be in the States, and as that wedding approached and the virus started, kind of spreading around the world, we were realizing that chances are we're not going to make it to this wedding. It was in Tennessee. My dad lives in New Mexico, but my dad's, I think my dad's got a great attitude towards life, but he was just like, well, if the wedding happens, I'll be there. He's 80 years old. I'll drive. If they cancel domestic flights, I'll drive.
Yeah.
And I was very thankful to my sister for canceling the wedding, because I knew my dad was serious. He was going to be there.
Yeah.
And his attitude would have been one of, if I die, I die, but at least I will have been happy and made my daughter's wedding. And that was important to me.
Well, isn't that fantastic? I mean, that's brilliant. It's sort of, and I guess, well, I can only imagine that most of us have reflected on our own death at this time.
Mm.
Thought, you and I are relatively healthy and our chances of survival are pretty good. But we also both know that people who are healthy are dying, and we were saying it. Well, yeah, I don't want to catastrophize the situation, but in the Spanish flu pandemic, the beginning of the last century, lots of people who, the first wave was elderly people, the second wave was younger people, like us. Not that we're young, of course, but I've thought about that, and this has been cause for reflection on my death, and actually, am I ready to die? And I've certainly taken some actions which I've been procrastinating around, such as setting up a will and a funeral plan. I've done that now. I don't expect to die, but I'm much more acutely aware that possibility exists. And I think actually my life's okay, and I've lived the sort of life, to a great extent. I don't regret anything. I'm living the life I want to live. And if I die, I die, sort of, I don't want to, but if it happens, it happens. And I'm grateful, I'm grateful for the life I've lived, and I'm living the life I want to live. I'm still living the life that I want to live. So, I hope a lot of people, hope a lot of Buddhists are in that situation, because we are trained to reflect on death a lot. And I imagine that we are better prepared than most. And it sounds like your dad's got a pretty healthy outlook on life as well. I don't know if he's a Buddhist or not. I suspect not.
No, but it does raise that whole question of, sort of like, well, to what extent do you isolate from dangers at the expense of living life? We could create a society in which everybody is perfectly isolated and safe. But what sort of life will that be? I think
Yeah.
Harari's book, Sapiens, he makes this point. He says, what's the most successful animal on the planet with respect to, population size? Do you remember that?
I've not read it. No.
Oh, you've not read it. He said it's the domesticated chicken.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because there's millions or billions of these chickens.
Yeah.
But what's the quality of their life? What's the quality of a chicken's life? And he says he'd much rather be a single dinosaur, kind of living its last breath, kind of, running over the hill, than a domestic chicken that's kind of, breeding successfully and, huge populations.
Well, that's it. I mean, you've raised an interesting philosophical question, and I think which side of the line we decide to go on that tells us a lot about ourselves, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with him. I'd rather be the last dinosaur in a way. And I suspect, New Zealand. We're in New Zealand and the UK New Zealand's in a much better position than the UK as far as deaths go. But our response, Britain's followed the New Zealand response. We're in lockdown and we're isolated. And I suspect people will not tolerate this forever. They will tolerate it for so long, because ultimately we cannot live a quarantined life. Because that isn't life, is it? We have to live life, and to stay like this is a sort of suicide, isn't it? Ultimately, for all of us, we can't live sterile, safe lives, because that isn't life. Life is risky. Life has to have risk in it. Has to have a bit of edge, I guess. We have to we have to face our own mortality, and take the risks that are necessary are worth taking in order to live a meaningful, quality life. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You were talking too about an underrated emotion, an emotion you thought was the most underrated emotion. What emotion is that?
Okay, it's poignancy. I think I'm not aware that it's a Buddhist emotion, or it's not identified in the Abhidharma as a Buddhist, as an emotion, a positive emotion. But I think it is. I think when we were talking earlier, and you were saying, well, how do I reconcile this sense of contentment with this awareness that there are people dying, a lot of suffering around me.
Yeah.
And yeah, that reminded me of this emotion of poignancy. So poignancy is the bringing together, or the conflation of both happiness and sadness. And surely that is our existential predicament. There are things to be happy about. Well, the human condition, from the wheel of life perspective, the truly human condition is where there's roughly equal pleasure and pain. And I think poignancy is an acknowledgement of both those things. It's an appreciation of the beauty of life, but also an appreciation of the transience of life. And that's what it is. It's the conflation between happiness and sadness. I practice the Amitabha sadhana, and part of that sadhana is a sunset. So this, a beautiful red sun sinking over the horizon. And the reason that I think that is so poignant is because it's so beautiful, and partly the reason it's so beautiful is because it's so transient. It's not going to last. It's sinking, it's going, it's disappearing before your eyes. And in a way, that is the predicament we're in now, or more aware of, I think, which is when death is closer, you're much more aware of the beauty, and what's important. And I think, how to reconcile this juxtaposition, this potentially antagonistic relationship between being content right now and also being aware of the deaths. Well, I think it's because I'm more aware of the beauty of life, perhaps, than I normally am.
Yep. And I do know that people that are facing, crippling illnesses and facing their own death, they do talk about that poignancy and the waking up that they experience. That they wake up to life, and and I remember talking to a particular friend of mine who he had that feeling when he first got diagnosed, but then later on too, after his condition became stable, he lost that edge. And I remember him saying he really he was sad. He grieved the loss of that vividness that life had when he was, Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I've experienced that too with friends who are dying. Yeah. They become alive. They really live towards the end of their life. They're once they're aware of their terminality, their end point, they're so alive. Yeah, there was a guy in the Manchester Sangha, or around the Manchester Sangha, an order member, who really probably squeezed a lot of life into the last 6 months of his life. He was just so alive, so appreciative of life, and so invested, really put so much into his relationships at the end of his life. Yeah, I think you're right. I agree. And I hope I can use this situation as a wake-up call to that. About what's most important. Yeah. And as you said, I think that word vivid, the living life vividly, that is how I want to live. It's not how I live most of the time, But unfortunately, I confess that, but it is how I want to live, I want to live as if this is my last day. you know. And if it was, what would I do? You know, I'd tell you I love you, you know, and sort of, I'd just rejoice in you, wouldn't I, all the time, you know, and all my friends, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's where it can seem a bit cliche that we live each day as if it's our last, and but I do think it doesn't mean you're necessarily going out and kind of riding roller coasters and doing bungee jumps off bridges and parachuting from planes, but
No.
it does mean living vividly. I guess that word you just used, it means living fully. It means telling people you love them. It means healing your problems, making amends,
Yeah.
apologizing for things, coming back into relationship with people who you maybe have dropped out of relationship with. um, it's funny. No one there's that. I don't know a lot of the research around end of life stuff, but when I've looked at what people regret, people never regret not having worked more.
No.
You know, they always regret kind of not having spent more time with friends, or
Absolutely.
yeah, you know,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, and as I said earlier, that is what's happening, isn't it?
yeah,
We're all more and more of us are connecting more and more with friends and family,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's where we're putting our efforts. Cynically, I could say, well, maybe there isn't much else to do. uh, but I think we're realizing what's important. Strip everything
yeah,
away. That is it. That is it.
yeah, yeah,
People are what's important. Life's is what is important,
yeah,
and it's precious. And I know that sounds cliched too, but cliches are cliches because there's the truth in them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having a bit of an evening chat, but I guess it's an
yeah.
evening chat for me, a morning chat for you, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
good. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Great. All right. Well, we'll see you again soon.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.